Alrighty, welcome to episode 277 of Backpacking America. I really do have a lot of content. I'm with me today is Paul. He is an author of the book Richard Nixon, California's Native Son. Paul Cartier. Paul, welcome to Backpacking America. I'm really excited to talk about Richard Nixon with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Anytime, man. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, what's your background in?
I'm a trial attorney,
Okay.
and I practice law in Long Beach, California.
Oh wow. Okay. So what? So I'm assuming that you got into Richard Nixon and wrote this book based off of all the legal challenges that he faced during his presidency.
I got into this because when I was in college, I was studying political science. I always wanted to be an attorney, and I thought political science was the best way. My mom told me to volunteer at the Nixon Library because I was going to Cal State Fullerton. So I volunteered there, and I never even thought that I would meet Richard Nixon. I didn't even,
Oh, you met him.
it never occurred to me. And yeah, so I met
Wow.
him, and I was really interested in the dichotomy of him in terms of what his public image is and what he was like as a private man, because he was very approachable. He was very, um, um, he was very nice,
Mm,
kind of the opposite of what I thought he would be.
interesting.
And I really love history, especially kind of like I look at it like history all around us. So when I go to Boston, I love going on the Freedom Trail, and or if I'm in New York City, I love kind of retracing where George Washington was, and that whole concept of freedom all or not freedom but history all around us made me decide to make a map of Richard Nixon's life in Whittier because it's a small Quaker town in Los Angeles that really hasn't changed much from the time that Nixon was growing up there. And researching that book researching that map led to me writing this book.
Huh. That's really cool. So what when you're writing this book, what are some things that you found out? Did you actually interview Richard Nixon? Did you get to interview him for it?
No, no, I didn't interview him, but I ended up getting to know his brother Ed pretty well,
Okay.
and I interviewed his brother Ed, and then I also got to know his sister-in-law Clara Jane, who was married to Richard Nixon's younger brother Don. I got to know her very well and interviewed her several times. I ended up interviewing about 60 of Nixon's intimates, and it's kind of sad because I started researching this in 2009, and the book was just published on September 1st, 2013. And in that 14-year period, incredible number of the people that I have interviewed and have participated in the research for the book have passed away just
Mm,
because, they were so elderly to begin with.
right. Oh wow. It's weird when you interview people like I've interviewed people on the show that have passed away recently, and it's
Yeah,
like whoa, like that's like you have like some of the last living testimony of a person in your work. It's a weird feeling.
it is. It is because they open up to you and they tell you things and then they're gone. And it's like you recorded their last, histories that they gave and now they're gone. There's no more opportunity to go back to them.
Right, and that's what's very like it's a special thing, really, especially when you're writing about a historical figure that passed away. Like you're contributing to a history that's important. He was one of the most controversial figures. What Not one of the most, but he was a very controversial president, probably comparable to Trump today, um, that we've had. And he did a lot of things. He ended the Vietnam War. There was the Watergate scandal. Um, there were multiple other scandals that I don't even remember. I just remember Watergate. And for a lot of my audience here, they don't know about Richard Nixon, or he's kind of like overlooked, which is very fascinating because he was a very controversial president.
He was in some ways and he wasn't in others, but the time period was very similar to the way it is now. You think of how divided we are
Mm,
and how much animosity there is right now. And you mentioned Donald Trump, and people are just so, everyone has an opinion about him one way or the other. And in 1968, when Richard Nixon was elected, that same year, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated, and the country was very divided over Vietnam. We were a country at war, internationally and almost within our own nation. And he was elected not by a majority but by a plurality. And
Ah.
he came into office, and by 1972, he's reelected in one of the largest landslides in American history. He won, 520 of the electoral college votes. It was 96.6 of the electoral college. It was just, an astounding reelection success. And then the Watergate scandal came, and he ended up resigning the office. And so it really was controversial times. And this image of Nixon that developed through the years that followed was one that, I actually was taught as a child, and I always believed it to be, true about him. And that's what made me so interested in him, because when I met him, my image of him and what I thought he'd be as a person and a politician was so different than what he was. And so that dichotomy between his public image and his private man self really stood out, and that struck me. And so when I started researching to do the map, what I did was I obtained 200 oral histories of Nixon's intimates from Cal State Fullerton, and another 400 of his oral histories of his intimates from Whittier College. And these were all taken between like 1968 and 1973. And this was 10,000 pages of oral histories.
Wow.
And I'm looking through them trying to find, where's the soda fountain he went to when he was in college? Where did the kids go on dates in 1927? Stuff like that. But in reading those oral histories, everyone talked about what a great guy he was, and how all-American he was, and how successful he was in his youth. And so that this biography really was screaming out to be told through those oral histories. And that's really what made me chase down this rabbit hole that ended up being Richard Nixon, California's native son.
Mm. And what, when you were discovering all this, like, what did he was a good guy, but like what made him decide to run for president? Like, why did he decide to get involved in politics? Was it for power, or was it genuinely because he cared for the country?
He genuinely cared for the country. When he was in the 8th grade, he wrote out his life's goals. And we all do that when we're kids. We want to be firemen or astronauts or whatever. Mm. And he wrote out that he wanted to graduate from Whittier High School and go to college and go to law school and be able to work so that he could be of some good to the people. And he really fulfilled that desire and that pursuit to be of some good to the people and be a politician. He was in constitutional oratorical debates when he was in high school. Mm. In fact, he was the champion of those debates. And in doing his research of the United States Constitution, he determined that it was, in his opinion, the finest document ever struck by the hand of man. And he was really somebody that believed in government and doing things through government. And he also felt that he would say that what separated the men from the boys was that the boys seek office to be somebody, and the men seek office to do something. So he wasn't doing it for adulation. He was doing it to, accomplish things. And if you look at his administration, the country was so divided when he was elected. He was in office for 5 years. He was a Republican president. He never once had a Republican House or a Republican Senate. Yet he ended the Vietnam War. He opened up China. He signed Title IX, which fundamentally changed women's sports. He started an initiative to bring women into the government. He quadrupled the amount of women in government, and especially in mid-level management. So for the first time, women became, jobs that we take for granted right now: Secret Service agents, forest rangers, tugboat captains, sky marshals. For the first time, women came into these positions. All 5 of the manned space missions to the moon were in the Nixon administration. He created the EPA and the Clean Water and Clean Air Act, and he declared that, clean air and clean water are birthrights to every American citizen. He restructured the Office of Management and Budget. He had so many accomplishments, and yet he did it by working with the other side. And so it was this desire to administrate and accomplish things rather than the adulation. And quite frankly, I think his core being was being an introvert in an extrovert's profession. Whereas, if you think of Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton, you think of people that can walk into a room and everyone, they can control the room by the way that they glad hand everybody. And Richard Nixon was much more of a reserved person that wanted to get things done. And I'm not saying that those presidents didn't want to get things done, but his real driving force was the accomplishment rather than the adulation. And to some degree, that might have been his undoing, because he wasn't the type of person who would brag about his accomplishments. He would let the record speak for itself, because he always believed the record would speak for itself.
Wow. And that, that really differs from what we see today in our government, at least from my perception. I feel that there, even with the recent war in the Middle East, or with the House Speaker, still not getting confirmed and getting removed, it's we're almost segregating our government into different camps where we're fighting so much at a time when we need to be united. It's a stark contrast.
Oh, absolutely. Full turmoil of, what happened in the 2020 election. And in 1960, Richard Nixon lost to John Kennedy.
Right.
It was the closest election in United States history. And there was a lot of fraud in the election. And a lot of fraud was being discovered and written about from the election. And President Eisenhower wanted Richard Nixon to contest the election results, and President Eisenhower's cabinet members were willing to raise the money for a legal challenge. And there was a particular writer named Earl Mazzo that had a 12-part series that he was publishing in the New York Herald that was being picked up by the Washington Post and the New York Times. And it was talking about the extensive election fraud that took place in Chicago and also in Texas, and how it could change the actual outcome of the vote. Wow. Even in 1960, in December, when John Kennedy met with Richard Nixon, Kennedy told Nixon, it's not clear who actually won the election. And so there's this huge drive to challenge the election. And Richard Nixon sat down and he told people, there's too many countries that are developing democracies that depend on our country to stand as a beacon of democracy. We do not have fraudulent elections, and we're not challenging this. And he even had the publishers of the New York Herald quash the series of articles that were being written by Earl Mazzo. And Richard Nixon then had the duty, as the sitting vice president, to announce, on January 3rd of 1961, that his opponent, John Kennedy, was the victor, and to certify his election. And so you talk about, a selfless act compared to today, where everyone seems so obsessed with their own self-importance. It was such a different time, and it's really fascinating to take a look at the actions he did and how he put country first.
Yeah, it's almost like I feel a lot of politicians, especially younger people that are getting into office, there's no such thing as Americanness, or what you said, like putting the country first. It's very career driven and me driven and ideologically driven, to where I feel people are using the United States and its idea to propel themselves. It's more like an article of clothing rather than a country and an idea and a commitment and a material thing. You see it with the AOCs of the world, the Matt Gaetz of the world, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, and it's very self-serving and ideological. And I always shudder, when or not shudder, more like shake my head when people say young people have to win office that will change the world. In a lot of cases, and I know a lot of young people that have run at local level and even at state level, personally, that are honestly, they're more dangerous in office than the older people that we have in office. It's actually very concerning, and I don't have hope for younger people turning things around just because they're young and youthful. If anything, they're going to be more cutthroat and totalitarian than who we have currently.
Well, and that's why I think it's so important to always look back and study history and see where things have happened and where things have gone wrong. Because we keep repeating the history, and if we would study it, we could at least see the different roads that we're going down. And it's really important for us to remember that we have more in common that unites us than what separates us. And if you're a Republican or a Democrat, we're basically in agreement on the direction we're going. We might have disagreements on how to get there, or how to row the boat differently, but it's important to remember we're all united in the same overreaching goal. And it seems to me that too often people lose sight of that, and it becomes a very self-centered focus about their own accomplishments. And they would really benefit from reading and studying history, because it would help them in their perspective, and it would help them in terms of our country, all of us, working together.
I agree with you. And I also think they should read the bills that they sign because a lot of people, I mean, they don't even read what the fuck they're doing. I'm like, there was a there was a bill that was passed last year. It was a 2,000-page bill or something ridiculous, and they had 24 hours to vote on it, and people just voted down party line with it. And the real question, the real thing, a lot of people were saying was you should have voted no on it because you didn't even get a chance to look at it. How
Right.
are you supposed to pass a 2,000 page? That's the problem with this country where it's like, well, this is bad governance. We're not going to vote on it because it's bad governance. It could be the greatest thing in the world, but if you don't know what it is, how are you supposed to know what what the law is?
Right. And we expect our representatives to actually represent our interests.
Right.
I'm not going to read the 2,000-page bill, but I expect my congressperson to read it and make an informed decision.
Yeah, it's that's
I'm banking
gone.
on the fact that they're going to do that.
You would think, and it's like down party line too. You know, especially like with, I'm a firearms activist, and I'll look at firearms decisions that are made by Republicans and Democrats, and people blindly say, "Oh, well, the Republican Party is always going to be pro-gun, or the Democratic Party is always going to be anti-gun," and it's not always the case. I mean, for in a very innocuous example, if you look at Alaska, which had a Democratic governor or a Democratic senator, I believe, and a Native American woman, you would think she would be anti-gun, but she has over 150 firearms in her home. So it's not always the case. And people need to realize that it's not just the party you're voting for. You're voting for sound legislation and someone that's going to lead the country in a way that is consistent with the Constitution and with our values as Americans. And that's very concerning, is that people are very partisan about how things are going. It's people are rather voting for the party than the individual, and that's blind and dangerous too. It flies in the face of history.
Right. You're absolutely right, because what that leads to is, like 30 years ago, I remember I saw a somebody did some sort of study in the New York Times or something where they basically made like a splatter graph,
Mm,
and they took a sheet of paper and they folded it in half, and they started on the far right, and for every member of Congress that was a Republican, depending on how far right they were, they put like a red dot on the page.
mm,
And then as they moved more to the left, it indicated that they were more moderate Republicans. And then some of the Republicans were actually past the center line of the page. And then they did the same thing starting from the far left with the Democrats. They put blue dots. And so if you looked at this scatter graph, there was actually some Republicans that were more to the left of some Democrats, and some Democrats naturally more to the right of some Republicans. And it seemed to be a time when people would work together more.
mm.
Whereas now, if you do that splatter graph, it seems that there would be no blending. All the Republicans would be on the right hand side of the page, and all the Democrats would be on the left hand side of the page. And there's no more blending, and there should be blending. It doesn't hurt to have some Republicans be more liberal than some Democrats, and some Democrats to be more conservative than some Republicans. That's actually good, and it's beneficial to our country. And we should look at the individuals, just like you said, and not strictly party line voting, because the if we just get into our silos and we never take our blinders off, that's it doesn't allow us to open our eyes and see the world the way that we should.
Absolutely, yeah. You need to have an open, and you need to be open to things. And I feel even at all levels of society, people aren't open anymore. Even in a non-political way, people aren't open to trying new things, having new experiences, meeting new people. It's actually infected the apolitical side of society. It's actually more like societally correct to be divided on everything, and stay like, even with people that like special interests and stuff, things that people are interested in, they make it a part of their personality, and they take offense when you're not into the same things that they're into. At least I've noticed that with, within my generation, within dating, within friendships, within, just life in general. Like, there's one or two core interests people have, they defend it to the death. And if you don't like those things, you're a bad person. And then the same thing with politics too, where it's like, oh, well, if you don't agree with this, you're a bad person, you're this and that, and I can't be associated with you. So it's a very it's concerning that it's actually extended beyond politics, and now it's in daily life.
You're absolutely right. I was, I'm active in my alma mater, Cal State Fullerton,
Hmm.
and I was being interviewed by one of the students one day, and she was um, talking to me about, it was kind of a blended conversation. Some of it had to do with politics, and some of it
Hmm.
just had to do with working and being a professional and things like that. And she had asked me, like, well, how do you get along with people that disagree with you? And I told her, well, let's just assume that I love mayonnaise and that you hate mayonnaise. Would we end our friendship over our contrary feelings about mayonnaise? And she's like, well, of course not. And I said, yeah, because neither one of us can affect the outcome of that debate. And that's really true about all of the debates that we're getting into. We have to remember, kind of what I said before, we're rowing in the same direction. We have the same goals. We all want better lives. We want our children to have better lives. We want our country to be better. We disagree on how to accomplish it, but it doesn't mean that we're enemies. We're all on the same team, working in the same direction.
Right. And people need to remember that too. I mean, even with the Israel-Palestine thing, I see people
Yeah.
protesting in the streets for pro-Palestine, pro-Israel. It's like, dude, if Hamas attacks America, whether you're pro-Palestine or whatever, you're a target. Like, we're gonna have to fight to get. Like, people forget that, but it looks like we're running out of time on the Zoom end. So I just want you to, because we got about like 10 minutes left. So I want you to talk a little bit about your book and where people can find it when they want to purchase it or read it.
Well, it's available everywhere, and so Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Powell Books, all of the major retailers. It's from Potomac Books, and it's in all formats. It's on audio, it's electronic, it's hardcover, and so however people want to get it, and if you want to see, what I do, what kind of, with this whole idea of history all around us, I have a website which is richardnixonsocal.com,
Mm.
and the book can be found there. And also I do posts about his life in Southern California. And if you look at Paul Carter CA, which is PaulCarterCA, on either Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, you'll see I make little videos of where Nixon lived and played and worked here in Southern California, and show you what it's like now. And really, it's just showing history all around us. And as we discussed earlier, this whole idea of learning history to make sure we understand it and we actually have a good grasp of what took place. And that's what the book is really about, and telling Richard Nixon's story is a Southern California person that grew up and was a politician and successful at it, but he also had some very low lows after Watergate. And I talk about the whole process of him rehabilitating himself and restoring himself through, cocooning himself in Southern California, and then returning to the international stage and moving back to New York, where he spent his last years. And, that's when he was in New York is when the whole idea of, I'm tan, rested, and ready kind of was born, and he was reintroduced to the world. But it's really a book that's an all-American story, and it's very entertaining, and it's very enlightening in terms of what his life was actually like.
Wow. I'm definitely gonna give it a read, and I encourage all of you guys to follow follow Paul and read his book, because there's so much knowledge that we could talk about, and we could probably go on for like 10 hours about it. But Paul, I really appreciate you coming on my show and
My
sharing some of your
pleasure.
knowledge. Well,
My pleasure. It was great talking with you.
likewise. And everyone, thank you again for listening to episode 277 of Backpacking America. Make sure you like, comment, follow, and subscribe. And also leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for me. And comment what you think on YouTube and on Instagram.